Hey guys, happy Thursday. Congratulations. We have covered 2,000 years of biblical history already together through the Gospel Project. So that's worth pointing out to the students. Some of them might think that's pretty interesting from Abraham to Adam all the way backwards. It's not quite 2,000 years, so that's pretty cool. We're not spending a lot of time on Abraham. We're not going to spend a lot of time on any one particular person because those people aren't the point. Jesus is. That's what we're looking at. So keep reminding the students of that too if they start saying, wow, we're going through this really fast. Yes, we are, because Jesus is the point. A few things I want you to see about this lesson that I think are pretty interesting. It was the promise of a baby that got Abraham's attention. Ur of Chaldees, where Abraham lived whenever Yahweh God first came to him, was already an incredibly wealthy area. And we get the impression Abraham was already a pretty wealthy dude. He had a lot of stuff when he left. That's why whenever he took Lot with him, Lot, had all of his own stuff too, and it just wasn't working. They were wealthy people. So the promise of God saying, hey, I'll make you a wealthy person. I'm already pretty wealthy, God. I'll give you a great name. Well, everybody here already knows me. Okay, I'll give you a kid. You have my attention now. So here's the deal. There's lots of fertility gods and goddesses back in that day, even now. And you can almost bet the farm on the fact that Abraham, who, by the way, up until this point, we see no evidence whatsoever that he's following God. In fact, we know Abraham's father was not a follower of God. God shows up to him and says, I'll give you a kid. And Abraham says, you have my attention. I'll do what you want. He was willing to follow God for this fulfilled promise. So that's a pretty amazing thing. So just kind of keep that in mind. It wasn't just money and power that Abraham was interested. It was a baby. Now that's not all God was interested in, but there was something that was jumping out to Abraham. Number two, I think it's pretty interesting. It took 25 years for this promise to be fulfilled. Abraham was 75 when God first showed up to him, and he was 100 whenever Isaac was finally born. Now, around 11 years, we know from Genesis chapter 16, around 11 years, Abraham almost gave up, or at least Sarah almost gave up. That's when she brought Hagar to Abraham and said, hey, let's have a kid this way. He didn't argue too much. Sure enough, Ishmael came around, but God immediately says, this isn't your heir. This isn't the promise that I gave you. I'm still going to keep my promise. And then he waited another 14 years after that to fulfill that promise. Here's what we want the students to see. God keeps his promises. It just takes a long time sometimes for them to be fulfilled. Now, thankfully, rarely do we have to wait 25 years. That's why Abraham is considered the father of faith. Not just that it all started with him, but he really set the bar high on for what faith looks like. But he did. He had to wait 25 years for this promise to be fulfilled. None of our students are 25 years old. So longer than all of our students' lifetimes, this man waited. That's a heck of an example of what faith should look like. So point that out to him. And then the last thing I think is kind of fascinating is the covenant rituals. And I wanted to point those out to you. This may or may not be helpful to students, but I thought it'd be fun to share with you. So when a covenant was made during this time period, the parties talked about the terms. And then two individuals from each party, or one individual from each party was chosen to represent the parties. It was usually families or a country. And then animals were sliced in half. And the two men would stand on opposite sides of those animals, and they would exchange robes, they would exchange belts, and they would exchange weapons. After they would do that, and usually they would actually put on the opposite person's clothing, robes and weapons, and then they would walk in between the dead animals in like a figure-8 style, almost like they were doing a dance, and then they would end on the opposite sides of where they would stand. And they would look at one another and say, may this or worse happen to me if I break this covenant with you. Well, Abraham cut the animals. And it says even in chapter 15 that he had to shoo away birds of prey because he's waiting on God to show up, right? And then he falls asleep, and that's when God shows up. And it says that God wove himself in between the dead animals. God was the one who made this covenant. God's the one who's going to keep this covenant. Even when Abraham has failed, God's keeping the covenant, which is a pretty amazing thing. So that's worth knowing, being encouraged about. God always keeps his promises. God never breaks his covenants with us, and he does the work all by himself, which is an amazing thing. So love you guys. Be encouraged today, and I will see you later on.